I want to start out with the piece that I published this morning over at HartmannReport.com, and it's titled, America's Cops Are Having Their Harvey Weinstein Moment. And, the essence of what I'm saying here, and I think this is a really important point for all of us to get, and as observers of culture, and we should all be observers of culture, we should be paying attention to what's going on around us, not just in the little day-to-day stuff and the, oh, look at this story, or so-and-so said this, but this larger view, putting things in the context of days or weeks or months or years or decades or generations or centuries. I mean, cultural change, cultures are very resistant to change. Typically, cultures are organized the way that they are because it benefits either the majority of people in the culture, which is how it's supposed to work in a democracy, or it benefits the people who control the culture. Now, in a democracy, that should be the majority of the people. It's sadly not in America anymore and hasn't been for about 20 years. I wrote a book about this, The Hidden History of American Oligarchy. But, it should be. But, and that's one of the reasons why I think culture in America is changing as rapidly as it is. But to finish that sentence, cultures either change because the majority of people like the way things are because they derive some benefit from it, or because the people who control the culture like the way things are and they derive some benefit from it. And that was very much the case with, for example, Harvey Weinstein. I mean, this whole thing of the casting couch, right? This was his defense. Oh, women just want to have sex with me because I'll put them in the movies. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just transactional. There's a new book out about Lucille Ball. And Larry Gatlin wrote a review of it, and he quotes more or less from the book, or paraphrases. She eventually, Lucille Ball, I Love Lucy, eventually found work as a model, and as she sought acting roles, received advice from Lila Rogers, mother of her good friend Ginger Rogers, as of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, right, that she would later follow. And Lila's advice was, quote, if you want to be to a woman, if you want to be a star within 2 years, get auditioned on the casting couch. And then Lila Rogers goes on to say, that's the advice I gave my own daughter. That's how Ginger Rogers got into the movies. So that was the norm, right? And that was the norm from 1900, when movies, were really just starting to take off, and silent movies up until the 1920s, and then talkies, and then whatnot. That whole casting couch thing, the Harvey Weinstein saying, hey, it's just, this is the way it is. I mean, Louise and I were watching a Cagney and Lacey the other day. This is from 1986. And there was a movie star, in quotes, an actor playing the role of a fancy movie star who came through the police station. And one of them turns to the other, Cagney and Lacey, one of them turns to the other and says, she slept with the producer. In other words, she's incompetent. What's she doing in the movies? Well, all that changed just in the last 5 years. I mean, it completely changed. And it didn't just change in the movies. We discovered that there was a casting couch culture in TV, that there was a casting couch culture on public radio. We discovered that it was going on in corporate America. It was going on right across the board, and it's no longer considered acceptable. And that's a really rapid change. I mean, you could say that, had you pointed it out 10 or 15 years ago, people would have said, well, that's not good. But it's genuinely not acceptable now. That's how rapidly culture can change when there's a consensus that change is necessary. The way that we use language, the way, our specific laws. So what I'm saying is that, oh, and by the way, that, putting Harvey Weinstein in jail was just phase one, because he was the rapist in this. Phase two was holding people accountable who were doing business with him. And not just him. You've got, executives all over the country who, knew what was going on with a wink and a nod. We saw a lot of this at Fox News. And they got fired too, Bill Shine is out, for example. Ended up in the Trump White House because he was just, that's all good. So I think the same thing is happening with cops right now. Police have been killing, abusing, torturing for their own pleasure. Poor people, black people, a whole variety of minorities, gender minorities, and raping women with impunity, probably for as long as there have been police. And America is now saying no. And a lot of the rest of the world is on board with us on this. Down in El Salvador, they just found 8 graves in the backyard of a cop. And the whole country is just bent out of shape. I mean, it's a national scandal. The murder by the police of George Floyd didn't just trigger a movement in the United States. It triggered a movement around the world. And basically, the movement is that, just like with the Me Too movement, women are sick and tired of being used. Now the bad cops movement, hashtag bad cops has gone international. And, as we're learning about this 2-year cover-up of these murderous Louisiana cops, and increasingly we're hearing calls to not just put the cops in prison for the rest of their lives for murder, but to put their supervisors in jail, and maybe to put the chief of police in jail. And if the Attorney General knew about this, to put the Attorney General in jail. I mean, come on, these guys beat, tased, hogtied with chains, and brutally dragged Ronald Greene to his death. Yesterday, the story was over at the top of Raw Story. I put a link to it in my piece on HartmannReport.com about a Texas cop who was off duty, out of uniform, off duty, got cut off in traffic by a woman making a U-turn because she was trying to get to the hospital. She was black. He jumps out and shoots her. Shoots her. Why? Because he can. Cops have been shooting black people and getting away with it for centuries in this country. So now we've got this serious possibility of police reform with the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And who's opposing it? The Republicans. Why do you think that is? Frankly, I think that they're just fine with cops terrorizing women and black people. After all, they don't want them voting either.